Welcome back, viewers, to Environmental History Worth Reading. We're back from the summer break, and Jessica has selected 5 of the very best in writing audio, video on the web in environmental history, as she does each month right here. I'm Sean Courage. I'm the director and editor at niche-canada.org, and I'm joined by Jessica.
I'm Jessica DeWitt, and I'm the Niche social media editor.
And we roll right into it with a topical piece about Hurricane Harvey and the role that people play in making disasters worse.
So the disaster studies folks have been really busy since Harvey and Irma touched down. So in this one, Jacob Reams, who wrote Disaster Citizenship, the book, he talks about how water flows into our social cracks, as in when it's flooding, our social inequalities really come to the forefront. So he talks about what makes a hurricane a disaster is when it comes into contact with people and our societies, and that it replicates, deepens, etc., social inequalities. And it has a few examples of things that are happening now that demonstrate these inequalities. I believe one of his examples is the fact that evacuees from the hurricanes, the ones that have money, are staying in hotels, and the poor citizens are laying on the floors of shelters. So he has a few more examples, and he talks about how poor neighborhoods are the most flood prone due to zoning. But what people on Twitter historians were pointing out was that his piece, in comparison to others, was a bit more hopeful. He ends with the idea that these disasters inspire altruism and solidarity, and perhaps the improvement of these conditions. So.
Yeah, there was a lot of quick reaction after Hurricane Harvey from environmental historians, highlighting a lot of things that environmental historians were saying back in 2005 after Hurricane Katrina, but the degree to which these hurricanes act as kind of highlighters on inequalities in urban America. Your second pick here is over at Seeing the Woods, the Rachel Carson Center blog, and this is a description or a roundup of a field trip.
Yes, so the whole summer they've been running this Danube series. So I think it's about twice a month. They've been doing one section going down the river, which I think is a kind of a neat idea for a series. And in this particular one, Christoph Netz is taking on the part of the river that's between Krems and Vienna. And so it's a field trip. He's visiting basic various things along the river that have environmental history components. He looks at a lock and a weir, and the way that research that is taking place there is looking at flow dynamics of different riverbeds. He also talks to people who are researching the flow rate of the Danube and how sediment is altering that, and how the government can make improvements to the flow of the river. And then also he talks to people about some invasive species, including the Japanese knotweed, and also a restocking effort to restock a fish called a sterlet. So it's just a nice little grab bag of things along that part of the river, and I've enjoyed this series in its entirety, and I recommend checking the whole thing out.
Yeah, it looks cool. There's a good picture of the fish here, too. Reminds me of chess.
Yes.
Over at the Discard Studies website, we've got an article here about the birth of the environmental movement in Britain.
Yeah, this is by John Clark. It's a story that I didn't know anything about. So in 1963, in a village, some farm animals died, and immediately suspicions fell on a nearby factory, and they did find out that this factory was producing toxic chemicals, specifically linked to pesticides, that led to the first mass poisoning of livestock in Great Britain. And Clark talks about how this normally wouldn't be that big of a deal, but the time at which it happened, just the confluence of these ideas led to the fact that this became a national concern that had international implications. And he ties this to the fact that after World War II, the rise in pesticide production grew enormously. And then the main part of the argument is that it happened at the exact same time that Carson's Silent Spring came out. So these arguments against pesticides were very fresh in everyone's mind. So he's arguing that this incident led to the modern environmentalism movement in Britain. So just an interesting post about an event that I had never heard of before. So
Yeah, and a great call out too to a good site that's highlighting this new area in environmental history of discard studies.
yes.
We've got a feature on the Georgia peach over at Smithsonian.com as your fourth pick.
Yeah. In this, William Thomas Oakey, he wrote a book about the peach, I believe. So he starts out by talking about how this year has been one of the worst for the Georgia peach industry due to unseasonably warm temperatures and a late freeze. They've lost almost 80% of the crop this year. But despite what people would think, it's actually a very small part of the economy of Georgia. And that he argues that the significance of the Georgia peach lies more in its cultural and historical relevance. So he basically talks about how it was introduced by the Spanish in Florida in the 1500s, and talks about how growing peaches isn't that difficult, but growing peaches that are marketable, that are large and unblemished, is difficult and requires a lot of intimate environmental knowledge. So he talks about selective breeding campaigns. He talks about the way that the government supported this development of this industry, connected Georgia to this peach through peach blossom festivals. And he also has some interesting things about how the labor on peach farms was connected to the civil rights movement. So just a bunch of stuff about peaches that, again, I didn't know anything about, and super interesting. So,
Well, you wrap up here with a provocatively titled article, Cows in Antarctica.
yeah, this is my favorite from this month because, I don't know, it's just such a good story. So basically, Hannah Nielsen and Elizabeth Lean are talking about these three cows, which have great names: Klondike, Gay Nera, Deerfoot, Guernsey Maid, and Foremost Southern Girl. Isn't that fantastic?
Foremost Southern Girl.
Foremost Southern Girl. I love that. So they talk about how in the 1990s, non-native species were banned from Antarctica, which I didn't know, but it makes sense. They want to preserve the native flora and fauna. But before then, lots of different domestic animals were taken there. And in this case, in 1933, U.S. Admiral Richard Byrd took these three cows on his second Antarctic expedition. And they discuss how keeping these cows alive, which they did successfully keep them alive and bring them back, was a lot of work. And so why was this worth it? Well, the first thing is that on the surface, they're claiming that it solves the expedition's milk problem. But they argue that it goes deeper than that fresh milk represented purity, wholesomeness, and thus the U.S. national identity. And then my favorite part of it is that they connect it to a frontier mentality, in that they were trying to make a territorial frontier claim on Antarctica. There was a geopolitical fight over this for countries to claim Antarctica, and that these cows were colonial agents, and by having these cows there, it made it a frontier settlement, and thus they had more claim to the continent. As a scholar of the U.S. Canadian West, the frontier, I thought that was super fascinating to have that connection.
Yeah, even Antarctica, object of attempted ecological imperialism.
Mm-hmm.
Well, an excellent set of 5 picks. And for those of you who watch these videos, you should know that Jessica kept picking things over the summer in our text posts up over at the Niche website at niche-canada.org. And there will be another 5 picks next month in October from
There she
the
will.
September harvest. Good seeing you again, Jessica. And we'll be back next month.
Thanks, Sean.